What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Cowboys Beat podcast for August 1st, 2024. And on today's episode, we're going to be going over day 6 of Cowboys training camp. Before we get into the video, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that. And let's hop into the episode. As we always do, we're going to go over Kyle Yeoman's recap of the practice from his X account. Cooks was electric in the passing game. Micah disrupted everyone on the offensive line at least once. Good reps from linebackers Harvey, Johnson, Clark. Lewis had his best practice. I think he meant to say Lewis had his best practice. More packages for Turpin. Lance struggled with decisions and accuracy. Dak fire emoji. So I want to start off this episode by talking about Mazi Smith. So the reports coming out of Cowboys training camp is that Mazi Smith has struggled so far throughout this training camp. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm pretty close to being out on Mazi Smith. This is a guy who has not shown improvement ever since he walked through the door and became a Cowboy. All throughout the course of training camp, you're hearing that they're trying to work on his technique, and yet he's making the same mistake over again. You see some of the tape that's come out from some of these practices. It feels like he's always on the ground, even though there are some good reps in there, and I'll give him credit for it. But at the same time, you are a first-round draft pick. You are a guy that, the front office has a lot of expectations for. You're a guy that they invested in. I would expect you to make a few good plays. However, Mazi Smith so far has been a disappointment, and I don't see him being what the Cowboys thought he was going to be even just this offseason come week 1. And I'm going to be honest with you. If there's not real improvement from Mazi Smith, I would be for the Cowboys moving on from him, whether that be trading him, whether that be releasing him. If he is a guy that is not good enough to be on this roster, he should not be on this roster, even if he was a first-round pick. You're hearing reports coming out of training camp that Justin Rogers has been better than Mazi Smith. And that's a guy who the Cowboys just drafted in the 7th round. He is a guy who is around the same age as Mazi Smith. I don't know what exact age he is, but he's a guy that just got drafted this past year that looks like he might have some promise to him. And it seems like he's further ahead in his development than Mazi Smith. So I'm close to being out on Mazi Smith. I'm not 100% out, but at the same time, I wasn't overly optimistic about Mazi Smith. I think there's going to be a take that people try and come at me with where you said, oh, well, you see here, you said if he would have been decent, this defense would be really good. Well, yeah, but I didn't say he was going to be that. I just said if he is that, this defense is going to be really good. Unfortunately, Mazi Smith has not proven that he could be a decent player, even just what we've seen so far in training camp. He has underwhelmed so far throughout training camp. And I understand the injury that he had, it did hinder him when it came to off-season training. And I understand that there was weight that needed to be put back on from the previous regime and, what they decided their vision was going to be for Mazi Smith. I understand that there are things that have gotten in the way of Mazi Smith being the player that maybe the Cowboys hoped he would have been coming out of Michigan. However, when you're hearing stories coming out of camp that he's making the same mistake over and over again when they're trying to teach him technique, that's a problem. When you're hearing that Carl Davis is having a better training camp than Mazi Smith, that is a problem. This guy is not a starting caliber defensive tackle at the current moment. Now, I'm not saying he won't be that. Maybe he does become that somewhere down the line. But at the current moment with the Cowboys, the way they are right now, where they are a team that could compete for a Super Bowl, they still have enough talent on the roster. They still have the core pieces from previous years. 3 guys, and I understand it's the NFL top 100 and whatever you want to think about it. But they have 3 guys ranked in the top 20. They have a really good team here. So if you are a team that is competing for a Super Bowl, you need to make the smart move and at the very least go get a guy like Linval Joseph, who is not a world beater, but he's at least decent. He's going to be better this year than what Mazi Smith will be this year. I have legitimate concerns about Mazi Smith. And I know there's people who make excuses for pretty much every player on this team for their lack of performance. But guys, this is fair. He has not shown enough to pretty much everybody over there at training camp that he has made the requisite amount of improvement that he needed to make to feel comfortable with this guy being the starting defensive tackle this year. And I understand why they're trying really hard to improve Mazi Smith because they spent a first-round draft pick on him. However, it has been, we're starting to see now that, hey, maybe that first year wasn't just, hey, Dan Quinn telling Mazi Smith to just lose a bunch of weight. Maybe there was more there that we should be concerned about with Mazi Smith other than what Dan Quinn and his regime wanted to do with him. But when it comes to him being a first-round pick, that's the reason why he's going to make this team ultimately. But if I'm Will McClay and I'm looking at the performance that Mazi Smith has had so far during training camp, I'm saying look, I'll wear it. It was a bad decision by me to fight for Mazi Smith. However, we need to move on from this guy because he's not good enough. It's going to hinder our football team, and we would be better served with somebody on our team that is not Mazi Smith. Because if you're telling me right now that the Cowboys could have Linval Joseph and Justin Rogers be their one techniques for this upcoming season, I'm cool with that. I would be fine with moving on from Mazi Smith. It's bad. It's not good. But that's fine. This happens to every team. Missing on a first-round pick happens to every team. But, the devil's advocate to that is with the way the Cowboys build their roster and rely on the draft so much, you can't afford to miss in the first round. But the fact of the matter is, you did here with Mazi Smith. Now, I shouldn't say you did 100% because we do have to wait and see how he performs in preseason games. And once we get in the regular season, maybe, very unlikely. But that's why I would say I'm about 97% out on Mazi Smith. There's a little bit there to where, hey, if I see the requisite amount of improvement that he needs to make, then maybe, I would like to explore that option. And it is still very early in training camp, and we do have to give him the benefit of the doubt when it comes to that. He is coming off that injury. There are things that got in the way here. But overall, Mazi Smith has not proven that he is one of the two best one techniques on this team, according to reports. And it seems like this room is pretty light as it is at defensive tackle. So if he can't be a top 5 player in this room, because if that's true that he's the third best one technique behind Osa and Carl Davis, you have guys like Osa and Chauncey Golston as well. I'm sorry, did I say Osa at one technique? I meant Justin Rogers. If you're telling me that Justin Rogers, Carl Davis, Osa, and Chauncey Golston are the best defensive tackles on this team, and he's like the 5th best defensive tackle, how many defensive tackles are you going to carry is my question. And, if you bring in a Linval Joseph, I still think you need to go add another 3 technique. I still believe you need to do that. And Mazi Smith doesn't play 3 technique. So it's really interesting to see what the Cowboys are going to do here. But, I'm close to being out on Mazi Smith, and that's my take on this whole situation. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully Mazi Smith starts to turn it around. But right now I'm not going to bet on that. So let's talk about Trey Lance here. Trey Lance has been struggling throughout training camp. This is a guy that the Cowboys brought in with a 4th-round pick, and he was supposed to be QB2 this upcoming season. I don't believe that he's the second best quarterback on this team. From what we've seen in training camp so far, you can get a good gauge on how these guys are performing if you pay attention to things on social media and, through the YouTube videos with guys like Brian Broaddus or even the radio or the podcasts that are going around here. You get a gauge on what's going on. And from all accounts, from what I'm taking from this, is that Trey Lance is not the second best quarterback on this football team. And that is a problem. The Cowboys spent a 4th-round pick to go grab this guy from the San Francisco 49ers, And this has proven so far to be an absolute dud of a trade. Now, we're going to have to wait and see what he does in preseason and if he can win that quarterback 2 spot over Cooper Rush. But for right now, I do not believe that he's the second best quarterback on this roster. I'm out on Trey Lance. I don't believe that this guy is going to be an NFL starter. I don't see that being the case. And understand this, the Cowboys could have used that 4th round pick on a running back that everybody wanted. Everybody wanted the Cowboys to go grab a running back in this past draft. They could have done that if they didn't trade for Trey Lance. And another thing is the Cowboys have had success drafting in the 4th round. Go back all the way to 2016. They drafted a franchise quarterback in Dak Prescott, an excellent tight end in Jake Ferguson, a really good tight end in Dalton Schultz. I understand he's not on the team. Dorrance Armstrong, Tony Pollard, who's a very nice running back. This team has success drafting in the 4th round. So the fact that they just gave away a 4th round pick for somebody who has not contributed for this football team and does not look like he's going to contribute in any type of form this upcoming season, not even as a backup quarterback, this is a complete miss of a trade from the Dallas Cowboys. And here's the thing, I'm hard on the Cowboys for this trade because they draft well in the 4th round. That's not just a throwaway pick. That could have been used to improve your roster, whether it be this upcoming season with the draft pick you would have used. You could have used that 4th round pick in another trade to go get depth at another position, or maybe go get a quality starter this past season that could have helped you out. Maybe you could have addressed the linebacker position with that 4th round pick. But you decided to go get Trey Lance, honestly, for no reason. Teams were offering 6th round picks for this guy. The only reason the Cowboys didn't just give them a 5th round pick is because they didn't have one that last year. They used less draft capital to go get Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore, 2 guys that were way more productive for the Cowboys last year. And they spent a 4th round pick to go get Trey Lance. I wasn't a fan of the trade when it happened. Teams don't just move on from good quarterbacks for a 4th round pick. Kyle Shanahan is a guy who has gotten the most out of quarterbacks that he's coached in the past. And Trey Lance, with all the raw talent that he has, apparently he couldn't be a guy that Kyle Shanahan elevated and got the most out of. And I understand the injury history. All the excuses you want to make for Trey Lance, all the Dak haters that want this guy to be the starting quarterback for this team after Dak leaves. I'm telling you, you think Dak Prescott isn't good. Let Trey Lance be your quarterback and see what an actual quarterback that is below average looks like. And he's not even below average. If he was a starting quarterback, where would you rank him? 32? I mean, are you trying to tell me that there's a starting quarterback who is worse than Trey Lance at the current moment? I don't think that's the case. If you were to rank the backup quarterbacks in the league, where does Trey Lance rank in that order? And I get it. He didn't have a lot of reps coming into the league and all the excuses that people are going to make for the guy. He's not a good football player. And I hate going after the player because Trey Lance is trying. He's working his hardest. I believe that the guy has a good work ethic. I believe the guy is a good guy. And it does not bring me any joy to come on here and talk about Trey Lance the way that I'm talking about him. But I have to be honest in what I'm seeing. And what I'm seeing is a quarterback that is very far away from being anything that anybody would even consider writing home about, or even being a starting quarterback in general. I just don't see it here. I don't see it here. And he's on the last year of his contract as well. What are the Cowboys going to do there? So if he's not even the quarterback 2 for this team, which I believe he will be, even though he won't deserve that role, you traded a 4th round pick for nothing. That's what you did. You gave away a 4th round pick. And I don't like the fact that this team did this because of their ability to draft in that round. They've proven that they can go grab guys in that round. And it's really upsetting that the Cowboys went this route last season and going and getting Trey Lance. The idea, I believe, was try to flip him into a third, second, first round pick. But what are the odds that that was going to be the case? I would have rather you just stuck with the fourth and go pick a guy that you think could be a player that you look at down the line and say, hey, maybe that guy wasn't a fourth round pick. Maybe you could have drafted that guy in the second round. They got really good value there. I would prefer that to be the case rather than, hey, let's try and turn Trey Lance into a guy that teams would be interested in trading for. I mean, what was the ceiling of what you were going to get in a trade for Trey Lance if he developed into, what the Cowboys thought he was going to develop into? And my question is, what did you think he was going to develop into? Did you think he was going to develop into a starting quarterback? Maybe that was their thought. Did you think he was going to be a Dak Prescott level quarterback? Maybe that was their thought too. I don't know what was going through their mind. And if there was an actual round table, I don't know exactly what happened here, but apparently the story came out and Jerry Jones forced this trade pretty much. He said, no, if they want a fourth round pick, we're going to give them a fourth round pick. Was this leverage against Dak Prescott? If that is the case, I hope that's not the case, because I would actually laugh at this organization. And I would think a lot less of this organization if that was actually the case. Because I do believe the Cowboys are a well-run organization. I do. Do I think they're great? Do I think they're a great front office? No, I don't think they're a great front office. I think they have deficiencies. But overall, I think they're a well-run football team. And that's not how well-run football teams act. So, yeah, Trey Lance, I'm very close to being... No, I'm not very close. I'm out on Trey Lance. We'll see what happens during preseason, but I'm not expecting very much from him at all. So I want to finish today's show off by talking about Brandon Cooks. Apparently, he had a really good practice here. Him and Dak were connecting, and that's going to be big. Brandon Cooks being a legitimate number 2 receiver for this Cowboys offense this upcoming season is going to be what really pushes the Cowboys into reaching their ceiling as an offense. I think that you started to see Brandon Cooks and Dak connect last season in the second half of the season. I mean, Brandon Cooks had 6 touchdowns in the second half of the season last year. So he was productive from that standpoint, but you do want to see more of the Brandon Cooks things that he does on display more this upcoming season, where you're talking about him taking advantage of the deep part of the field, him being a legitimate deep threat. I do think that there were some plays left on the table between him and Dak Prescott. I think that connection is going to be better this upcoming season. I think he's going to be more comfortable in this offense. I think Brandon Cooks will have a better season this upcoming season than he did last season. And I thought he had a fine season last year, but I do think you're going to see more production from Brandon Cooks this upcoming season. I'm not saying this guy is going to be, a legit superstar receiver this upcoming season, but can I expect 800 yards from Brandon Cooks? I think I can do that. And when you match that with a Jake Ferguson, who I expect to get over 800 yards, along with CeeDee Lamb, who I expect 1,500 plus from, I think that you have a nice trio there of receivers, along with whatever other receiver steps up and wants to be that 4th, 5th, 6th option for this football team this upcoming season. So, my thing with Brandon Cooks was I felt like last year they were asking him to do things that Brandon Cooks really doesn't do. They asked him to kind of be like the Michael Gallup type receiver, but that's not what he is, right? And when we talk about some of the best offenses in football, you look at Miami with Hill and Waddle, you look at Cincinnati with Chase and Higgins, and I just feel like, Philadelphia with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I feel like if you're going to be an explosive offense that puts up a lot of points, you need your wide receiver 2 to be your second option. That's just what I feel. And the Cowboys were number 1 in points per game last year, so maybe I'm wrong when I say this. But at the same time, I feel like if the Cowboys want that offensive success to transfer over into the postseason, Brandon Cooks is going to be very vital in that, because when you look at Brandon Cooks and his skill set, like I talked about earlier, his ability to take advantage of the deep part of the field, that's going to open things up in the middle of the field for guys like CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson. If you have a legitimate threat on the deep part of the field, now you put teams in a bind to where you say, hey, we'll just throw the ball down the field to Brandon Cooks. If you want to put more guys in the middle of the field and emphasize the middle of the field more with your coverage, we'll just throw the ball downfield to Brandon Cooks and pick up a big gain. What do you want? Do you want death by 1,000 paper cuts, or do you just want, a big play to happen? Because we will throw the ball to Brandon Cooks. And another part of this is, hey, Tolbert, Brooks, Cropper, one of you guys needs to step up and be a legitimate wide receiver 3 here. So I'm not saying it's unrealistic to think that they can have a plethora of receivers that step up for them and make plays for them. I actually think that that's going to be the case. I believe in John Stevens as well. I think they're going to be better throwing the ball out of 12 personnel this upcoming season. I believe they were in the middle of the pack with throwing out of 12 personnel. Okay, I was just making sure because I have my ESPN alerts on. I don't have my text message alerts on or anything, but I have my ESPN alerts on just in case, one of these deals happens and I got to, break down in the middle of the show talking about that. But that's besides the point. Yeah, one of these guys needs to step up outside of Cooks, Ferguson, and Lamb. And to be honest with you, Brandon Cooks needs to step up as well. And he needs to be better than what he was last season, even though I was fine with what Brandon Cooks gave you because of the touchdowns and how reliable he was for Dak in the red zone. And the fact that he did have 3 plays this past season in the fourth quarter that gave you a lead late in the fourth quarter. Now, you were 2-1 in those games. You won the Chargers game. You won the Lions game. You lost the Miami game. That's not Brandon Cooks' fault. When you threw the ball to him on that corner route, guess what? He made the play. And the offense scored. And the defense didn't do their job there. So, that's kind of my thing with just how this offense is going to look in its totality. If they want this offense to reach its ceiling, it cannot just be CeeDee and Jake Ferguson. Brandon Cooks needs to step up along with another receiver or 2 because I feel like John Stevens is going to be a baller this year. I expect from John Stevens maybe like a 300 to 400 yard season, but maybe 5 to 7 touchdowns around that range. Maybe he's a red zone target for Dak. So I think they have a lot of interesting possibilities here in this receiver room. But to me, it's all for nothing if you don't get the type of production from Brandon Cooks that you were expecting when you acquired him. That's going to be it for the episode, though, guys. If you haven't already, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that. And I will see you guys in the next episode.